so much, everyone, and thank you, Team GCTC. And I heard half of the panel, and it has been really wonderful listening about the cybersecurity. And I was curious about understanding that how far we can relate the cyberspace with the idea of transnational network, which can come up to work for this, because we were talking about the strategies specific to the nation state. But even in my understanding, and as far as the scholarship goes for the cyberspace, we understand that cyberspace is providing us the understanding which is going beyond the borders, and it is also challenging the operational procedures in the real world. And it is not in the realm of today's environment that we understand that it is just limited to the nation states, but it has gone beyond the boundaries of the nation state, and which is why there are people who are arguing and who are asking about that if we have to ensure the cybersecurity environment, do we need to have the perfect mechanism, or do we need to have the mechanism coming from the transnational networks? So on this note, I mean, this is the small observation which I had from the previous discussion, and I wanted to share it, that this is something where we should think of further, that what kind of cooperation we are looking for when we talk about the cybersecurity, especially the cybersecurity environment. And I'm sure that this is a 3-day conference where we have all the eminent speakers coming from different walks of life, coming from the different area where they have expertise in, and they'll be speaking upon this as well. And along with it, I remember that I was not able to devote much of a time since morning, but one specific panel which I was hearing was about when our professor, our vice chancellor, Professor Bhatnagar, was speaking about the basics of the hacking, and then how he was explaining that what is happening in terms of the university level here. So to rationalize the importance of this conference, I can say that the cybersecurity conference is much needed at this point in time, because it is something which is which is being observed by the people on the road, as well as the people who are sitting in the ivory tower and doing their own research. And all inclusive, this is the time to discuss about these things, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic era, where we all are trapped in the cyberspace somewhere or the other, to get things done, and to finish our work. So I appreciate the thought behind organizing this. And on this note, I would, these were the quick thoughts which I gathered from the previous session, and also from the morning session which I was hearing about. Before I begin the session, I would like to thank Air Marshal Anil Chopra. Sir is the Director General of Center for Air Power Studies, and I know his speech is over, but still it is my due to introduce him, and I will introduce you. Most of us know him, but still it is required to just reiterate what we have heard as well. He's a retired Indian Air Force officer, and until December, he was with the administrative member of the Regional Bench of Armed Forces Tribunal at Lucknow. And specific point which is to mention is that his service has been honored with the prestigious military awards of Indian Army, Param Vishishta Seva Medal, Ati Vishishta Seva Medal, Vishishta Seva Medal, and Vayu Sena Medal. Sir has been working on the idea of cyberspace and also the Indian realm of the digital space, and we heard him. I want to thank him on behalf of the GCTC and entire organizing panel and all the eminent institutes which are participating in this, for his wonderful discussion and for his wonderful thought which he shared, his entire idea of perspective of the entire cyberspace, and especially the cyber warfare strategies, which is specific to the nation states. So I want to thank him, and that is something which is required. Thank you so much, sir. The next session which we have here for today is the cybersecurity global perspective, and here we have the discussion on. We know that cyberspace is the virtual world of computers and its related technologies. And it is the new domain of conflict in 21st century, taking up from the recent discussion of the cyber warfare. With rapidly growing technology and a steadily increasing user base from all walks of life, cyberspace is expanding at a fast pace. And if you will see the size, it has gone at the larger scale. And understanding the vulnerabilities, we know that even people are eager to participate in the cyberspace also because of the conditions being put by the pandemic era. And we know that it is, as the cyber domain was not built with the concept of the ensuring security and safety at its inception. But today, when we look at it, it has become extremely difficult for all the security agencies of the world, all across the countries, to induce the unsusceptible security mechanism into such an intense and vibrant realm. As a result, what has happened? It has become vulnerable to numerous security threats, and which is pertinent to the which is pertinent to the section, to the society which we see as the international at the international level. So, like I was mentioning, it has become extremely important to talk about it, and not just talk about it, to think about it at a different level. And when we talk about the various mechanisms which people will provide you, it is more important than talking to see the implementation strategy which can come from the various level. So it cannot be just at the level of the nation state, it can also come from the level of the individual per se. So when I talk about global cybersecurity, I may also become an agent to participate in that. When I'm a subject to the cybersecurity threat, why I can't be the agent who can ensure the security environment which is required for the cyberspace. So keeping this in mind, we know that we have a lot more to talk about, but this is something which I want to give to all the participants and all the eminent speakers who are here today to talk about it. This panel especially is about is focused to discuss the concept of deep web, dark web, cyber crime and terrorism, cyber and information espionage, cybersecurity standards and technologies, and artificial intelligence and cyber risk management. So keeping these in mind, if you will see, these all are the important areas which you can talk about, and which you can think of when we talk about the cybersecurity realm. Now here, I'm hoping that this session will talk about, along with these concepts, we'll also have the discussion about the implementation strategy which we see in terms of these. Though AI has become the part of our life in from morning till night, we have this as an important as an important element which we may not talk about, but even if we are running our washing machine, we are relying on artificial intelligence. And today is the time where we are mostly trying to understand the role of AI, even if not at the very technical level, but still at the day-to-day level. We do have a discussion about how AI can ease our life. But we also need to understand that AI is about easing our life, but it also everything has its pros and cons. So even AI has its cons, which we must need to know as a careful citizen, as a person, as the individual who can understand the cost of it and then understand it. Though the situation to weigh is very tough, and the entire dilemma comes where you talk about the ease of life. Now, without taking much time, I would like to open the session and invite our moderator for the day, and then we can have the session, we can have the key speakers to talk about the area where their expertise lies on. We have our moderator today as the Executive Director of Interpol, Mr. Madan Mohan Oberoi. Dr. Madan Mohan Oberoi is an IPS officer, and he has also been a Fulbright scholar on the area of cybersecurity. And I'm hoping to learn from him a lot on this topic, especially when I talk about the cybersecurity and transnational network, the contribution of transnational network. He has also worked, he has supervised various works on the information system and technology and he has been attached with the Interpol Innovation Center and Capacity Building and Training Directorate. Over to you, sir. And I welcome you on behalf of the conference organizing team, which is an association with the esteemed institutions of the country, namely Jawaharlal Nehru University, Indian Society of International Law, Banaras Hindu University, All India Council for Technical Education, and Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, a joint initiative of DSCI, which is Data Security Council of India and Government of Telangana. Thank you, sir. Over to you, and a very warm welcome.
Good evening, colleagues. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. The topic for today's discussion is cybersecurity global perspectives, and I would make a small attempt to introduce this and give you my perspective on the global perspectives, and see then wait for our esteemed panelists to give their thoughts, and then maybe we can have some discussion on this. So, in order to have a more participative discussion, I'll keep my talking points to bare minimum, and maybe look for a more interactive session following this after all panelists have made their points. So I'll start with giving an overall view what we at Interpol see in terms of cybersecurity, and what we are seeing that although it has been a priority for most of the business leaders and organizational leaders as well as national leaders, yet despite so much investment and so much security control, so much preparation, cyber attacks keep on coming. Now, cybersecurity, we feel, is a very complex challenge which is encompassing different domains, whether it is governance, policy, operational, technical, and legal aspects also. And everything from our country's power grid to our national transportation network is today online, and therefore each of these things is vulnerable. And what we are seeing, and today there's a very thin line between whether our adversary is a state actor or a organized criminal gang. So since the attribution is very difficult, we are not going into who is the adversary, so we simply address them as adversaries. And in order to tackle the threat which we are facing in the cyberspace, I would say we have to learn from them, because they are very integrated, they are acting very fast, they are acting very globally, whereas we are trying to face this global threat with territorial responses. And tackling a global threat with territory-based responses is never going to succeed. And that's where our mindset needs to change. And therefore, what we see is that three broad guidelines to tackle cybersecurity issues are international cooperation, better coordination in terms of cybersecurity management planning as well as preparedness, and most importantly, developing our competence, our capacity to combat cyber threats. In this, I would also mention to say that today cyber attack can come from anywhere at many places, and the response protocols therefore have to be articulated both regionally, nationally, as well as globally. And therefore, what it actually means is that the relevant authorities, whenever they face a crisis, need to know whom to call, who is their counterpart in the different jurisdiction, how to call them, and what kinds of protocols are needed there. And in that context, we are also seeing that cybercrime is becoming more innovative. The attacks are becoming more sophisticated, and this has been recently shown in terms of SolarWinds, Microsoft, FireEye, all of this. So today there's more democratization of victims' profile also. It's no more what we used to say, that we need to educate our vulnerable sections of society so that they don't get victims to maybe an attack coming from Jamtara or something like that. But we are seeing the best prepared organizations are facing attacks and are not able to protect themselves from these attacks. And that is the level of sophistications which we are seeing. Here I'll also come to, and maybe I look forward to Madam Lata Reddy to help us in giving more uh, guidance on this in terms of what is the relationship between the cybersecurity governance and internet governance. What do ICANN, IETF, IGF, and GCCS and other internet governance forums, what is their role in combating cybercrime or ensuring the security of cyberspace, and how we are working on that? Because my belief is that this has a very intricate uh, relationship with overall cybersecurity situation. The next aspect which I would also like to mention is what we saw in the recent pandemic. So the broad things which we have seen is that first of all, nothing is off board. So whether it is in the time of pandemic, whether it is a health sector which was being targeted, so there are no red lines or something which is a taboo area for criminals. They are just looking for profit. Whether it means cutting off the hospitals' IT infrastructure in terms of pandemic, they will not stop at that. They will use or whatever they have to attack that. And we are also seeing synchronized attacks. We are also seeing kind of a very blurring line between the state actors and criminal actors, and that's what is causing a lot of concern, because in many jurisdictions we have seen targeted attack where attribution is going to criminal actors, and we are also seeing they are using the tools which were maybe prepared by some state actors for the criminal purposes. Now, all these things are adding to the complexity of the cybersecurity situation. And what, in my view, what we need to do is maybe we have to change our the way we are tackling the cybersecurity, because what we have been doing for so long is kind of working on improving our defenses, how to protect ourselves against cyber attacks. And I always say in many of my presentations that this is not sufficient. If we look at the physical space, bigger locks, higher fences, more CCTVs never protect us physically. It is the deterrence of a punishment which may come on a criminal, that is what protects us from the physical attacks. And this is the aspect which is lacking in cyberspace. Today, a cyber criminal, whether it is an organized criminal gang or a state actor, or they work with kind of more than 90% confidence level that nothing is going to happen to them after their attack. Because if you look at our conviction rate, this is what are the figures which are telling us. So if anybody is working with a confidence of 95% or more, that they are not going to face any consequences of their actions, and they have huge monetary gains to come out of it. No amount of firewalls, no amount of intrusion detection system, no amount of SOCs are going to protect us. We have to change this narrative. Unless we change this narrative, we will be targeted, we will be struggling, and that's what probably needs to change. At this stage, I think, pause and hand over back the floor to Madam Vaishali Raghuvanshi, and to invite the other panelists. And maybe we can look at more interactive discussion after the individual opening statements of all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madan. I'll be inviting now our very first speaker for the panel, Madam Vijay Lata Reddy. Madam is a retired IFS officer, and she's a co-chairman, the Global Commission on Stability in Cyberspace, and she has also been a former deputy national security advisor at the Government of India. And I warmly welcome Madam, on behalf of all the universities organizing and GCTC and all the participants here. Madam, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, I am. Okay. Well, let me begin by saying that, as Madan said in his opening remarks, I propose to talk about a specific area, which is essentially not just the global perspective, but the global perspective on what we see as solutions. We've heard a lot in the course of the day about cyber warfare, about cyber threats, about cyber security. I would rather concentrate on cyber solutions, cyber diplomacy, and cyber norms. A lot of people tend to see cyber security and cyber threats in a uh, very geopolitical term in terms of adversaries, and the traditional binary view has been to see US, NATO, OECD, EU on one side and China and Russia on the other. I think the truth is far more complex. I think that you need to look at the whole question of data governance, privacy, the roles of platforms, the roles of the MNCs, of course, the roles of government, technical organizations, and NGOs, as well as academia, and all cyber users and civil society. Uh, we have to recognize, first of all, that this is a borderless realm. Therefore, no matter how secure we may feel nationally or what excellent systems we may set up nationally, uh, you cannot say that your cyberspace is safe unless there is general global cyber safety in a particular area. We are too connected. In today's world, everything is so connected, be it financial systems, be it healthcare, be it any kind of communication technology, that it is impossible to just retreat into what I call tech nationalism and say, I'll make my country secure. Yes, you can make your system safer, but unless you want to cut yourself off from the rest of the world, which is practically not possible, you have to be concerned about general security and global security, as I said. Many initiatives currently exist for encouraging international cooperation in these areas, and but it's very difficult to achieve any kind of global agreement on cybersecurity. There are many reasons for this. The geopolitical positions taken by countries is certainly one factor. But let me just talk about some of these initiatives. I'd like to begin with the UN. As you all know, the UN has had the governmental group of experts meeting in 2010, 2013, 15, 17, and now most recently over the last year and a half. And they are in the process of putting out their final document now. Sorry, not the GGE, the OEWG, the Open-Ended Working Group. The difference is the UNGGE has been regarded more as an exclusive club of a certain select number of countries. It's gone up from 15 to 20 to 25, but it is ultimately a small and restricted group. Whereas the open ended working group has been open to all nations, all countries that are members of the UN can join the open ended working group. So it's the open ended working group that is in the process of finalizing its final statement. And the UNGGE is also going to be coming out with its report shortly. The question is that in previous UN GGE reports, which again were not globally binding, and many countries objected because they said it's just something, norms and regulations designed by a few countries. There were very good norms pointed out in both 2013 and 2015, on which logically no country should object. They are very logical, very clear ideas of not causing harm, of allowing certain critical information infrastructures to stay safe, of not attacking each other's certs or computer emergency response teams, and essentially trying to prevent cyber warfare in a sense. I see more of a hope in adopting the OEWG method, because there it is a more democratic method where all countries have a voice. In the UNGG, I would say the major cyber powers had a voice. India, for example, was a member of almost all UNGGs, but and so were China and Russia and the US and several others. But obviously, the smaller countries would feel that this is a decision imposed upon them. In addition to that, the UN Secretary General set up a high level panel which came out with its own recommendations. You also had a roadmap set out at the end of study of the UN Secretary General's recommendations and the high level panel's recommendations. And you had UN organizations like UNIDIR and UNODA who've done some excellent work on this. And in fact, UNIDIR acted as the secretariat for the open ended working group. So there's a lot happening in the UN, firstly. And in a sense, connected with the UN is the whole question of the WISIS or the Tunis agenda and the Internet Governance Forum, which was set up as part of the Tunis agenda resolutions. And there has been talk of expanding the IGF, which is a truly multi stakeholder platform. You could argue, why does the UN need the UN platforms and the IGF? Because IGF is one place where industry, all these areas I talked about, industry, academia, civil society, users, everybody comes and participates there on equal terms with governments. So you actually get a more accurate view of what everybody expects from cybersecurity and from the cyber environment in the IGF than you would in something purely directed by governments. So you also have other initiatives like the Paris Peace Forum, where you have again what I call a multi-stakeholder approach, where you have governments, you have also the industry, you have academia, and all the other stakeholders. And there have been some remarkable initiatives by industry. Microsoft has backbone the tech accord, which was signed on to by multiple huge companies in the cyber area. And Siemens did the Charter of Trust. And most recently, with a lot of backing and finance from the private sector, you've had the Cyber Peace Initiative, which has been set up essentially to help victims of cyber attacks and to look at it from a more human centric point of view. And but what all of these organizations have tried to do, including the two which I've been very closely involved with, the Global Commission on Internet Governance, where I was a commissioner, and the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, where I've been the co-chair. What have they looked at? We've looked at what kind of norms we should have. We've looked at what kind of rules we should have. We've looked at principles. We've looked at what do we do to prevent cyber crime? How do we assure a safe supply chain? How do we look at a multilateral approach versus a multi stakeholder approach? In other words, government versus a more inclusive approach. You look at tech nationalism, which, as I already said, I don't think is an answer, because every country can't just retreat into itself and say, my country is safe, so it doesn't matter. And the whole question of the question which Madan raised, which is internet governance versus cyberspace. There is a big difference, because internet governance is only one part of cyberspace. There is so much else. Internet governance is just how are we going to regulate, what norms would be applied, what regulations would be applied to the internet, but cyber has expanded to mean something far beyond internet, including, as again was mentioned, artificial intelligence and all the new technologies that are coming in. So there are many, many initiatives. Sovereignty issues are very paramount. Countries are very touchy about this, particularly countries who feel that the internet cannot be completely open, free, and accessible with no regulations or checks whatsoever. We've been going through a little bit of this debate in our own country with the newly published IT rules and the debate about social media and the OTT platforms. And too much of a race for superiority and rivalry between countries can actually in itself become a security paradox, which is something to think about. That's why I feel the multi-stakeholder and the multilateral approach need to be strengthened. Why? Because I don't think multi stakeholders alone can do it. Finally, the treaties, the agreements, the acts, the formal governments between governments can only be made between governments. It sounds self evident. But I think where governments should be wise is to take inputs from all of these different stakeholders and let it formulate the government's approach. To take it as an us versus them philosophy does not really work in cyberspace because ultimately, governments may regulate it, governments may try to control it, governments may try to pass rules and laws, but ultimately, it's also industry that develops the technologies, and it is also the user who has certain expectations from those technologies. So this is why I would advocate that both processes have to be strengthened and in a sense draw and learn from each other. I think the voluntary and non-binding norms that we've been talking about in many of the fora, there is a certain reluctance to go in for a binding norm, because people don't want to be tied down forever to these norms, uh, is an issue. Because frankly, unless you have binding norms, eventually, how are you going to actually hold anybody accountable? If you make it purely voluntary and non-binding. The accountability is another big issue because without attribution and accountability, holding individuals or organizations or even governments responsible for certain attacks is going to be impossible. You need the criteria to be laid down very clearly, and you need some kind of formulation of an attribution um, mechanism. The role of international law is another issue on which there's been some contention. People argue that international law prevails above all else, and rightly so, in my opinion. But again, that's where the tech nationalism comes in to compete with that. And I think the main thing is more positive, easier achievable goals are to talk about capacity building, about the richer and more powerful countries, helping other countries to reach the same levels of protection of their systems, to talk about confidence building measures, to talk about cyber hygiene. These are not contentious issues. And even critical information infrastructure, though it seems like a no brainer that critical information infrastructure should not be attacked by countries or individuals or groups, um, there are people who I would say the hawks in every establishment in every country who would argue that in times of war they would be entitled to attack even critical information infrastructures, and also whether a cyber attack can be responded to by a kinetic attack. This has been a point of contention between certain countries. While we certainly need to strengthen our national systems and regulate them, we must ultimately work towards a goal of basically trying to reach some kind of global agreement. Barring that, because it's obviously going to take some time to get to that level, to reach a global agreement on internet governance norms, on other areas of cyber norms, frameworks, and coordination mechanisms due to all the geopolitical tensions and security issues between the major powers. I think, we need to look at something else. We need to look at the question of how do we build trusted partnerships? Because if we don't build good partnerships, India would be in a very difficult situation because, in many ways, India is an outlier. If you look at it from a purely global point of view, and given my diplomatic background, I tend to look at things from a more global or international point of view. In democracy, we stand with the West. In the pursuit of democratic ideals, in considering ourselves a democracy, we certainly would stand with the West. But uh, if you look at our income, if you look at our developmental issues, we are certainly part of the global South and certainly a developing country. We have a first world IT market and IT capabilities, but in many other areas, we lag behind. For example, even now in the push for Digital India, while we take great pride in how many people we have connected, we forget how many people are not connected, which is why I think sometimes initiatives like trying to do everything online through apps is not very practical for a country like India. We need more of an hybrid model where there's a physical, simpler way to do things and there's a more technologically advanced way to do things because we have both kinds of people in our country. So I think, the uh, we really have to look at this from many points of view. Also, what is good for our industry, for our IT industry itself. And where partnerships are concerned, Nitin Pai of Takshashila here in Bangalore came up with a very interesting point of view where he talked about the need to build bubbles of trust, uh, technology bubbles of trust, where we come into good partnerships with trusted partners who will give us the technology and give us the tools that we need. Uh, and that perhaps is the short term solution. But in the long term, I would argue that we must find global solutions and have more international cooperation. I will stop here for now, and I'll be happy to take any questions that come up and perhaps contribute in some other way in the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think the point which you have spoken about, the technology bubble, is something which we must understand and we must deliberate further on. And there are several other points which you have spoken about. Probably we'll have during the Q&A, we'll have a further deliberation on that. I now invite our second speaker of the session, and that is Mr. Uriz Trainer, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He's a vice chairperson of the Global Counterterrorism Council International Cybersecurity Conference, and he has also been the former director of the National Cybersecurity Authority, Israel. We welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here in this conference. I really enjoyed what I had until now. And I will try to focus in my, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes speech on cybercrime and the trends and things that I see in this arena that is developing as the cyberspace expand. And I might tell you that some might think, where are the borders of the cyberspace? And actually, I think the best way to think of cyberspace would be to declare that wherever there is an electricity current, this is a part of the cyberspace. Because if there are computers that are controlling the current, then it's part of the cyberspace. And if there are no computers that control the stream of electrons right now, then it will become a part of the cyberspace in a manner of 1, 2, or 3 years. So wherever there is electricity current, this is part of the cyber space. So if the cyberspace is so wide, then there are a lot of opportunities for criminals to get inside. And I can share with you some discussions that I had with chief inspectors of police organizations all over the world. And I heard from them that they all experience about 10 to 15% of reduction in the rate of physical crime. 10 to 15% is pretty much. And all of them, each single one of them said that they think the reason, or they are sure the reason is that crime has moved toward the cyberspace instead of do physical crimes. And I'll explain in a minute why it is so logical. When was the last time you tried to take $1 million in your hand? How much $1 million weigh? What do you need in order to take $10 million? Do you need a big suitcase? Do you need a truck? Do you need a small pickup? Well, I will tell you the answer. You don't have to calculate. Let's say that you steal $1 million in $100 bills. Then those are 10,000 bills of $100. And they will fill the capacity of about one small to medium briefcase. So if you want to steal $10 million, you need to bring 10 briefcases. And if you want to steal $80 million, like the sum that was stolen from the bank in Bangladesh through the SWIFT organization, then you need to take 80 briefcases. And that exceeds a normal private car. Do not take 80 briefcases. You need to bring a small pickup at least. And that's why we understand why crime moved toward the cyberspace. It's much more efficient. And you don't have to take risks. I heard from a couple of politicians that I talked to and from professionals in the cyber domain, they said that the market or the size of the crime in cyberspace is bigger than drug market. And you might think to yourself, how can that be? Bigger than the drug market? Well, if you look after statistics, you will understand why. Because in order to have $100 million in, I don't know, in drugs, just think of the operation you need. But if you can steal that kind of money with some kind of keyboard strokes, probably that will be the best manner to do that, and that will be your choice. On the other side, we have another development in the great cyber arena, which is called the cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency is a huge enabler for cybercrime because it keeps the anonymity of the payments. And just like criminals in the cyber domain, they use cash money. Now they have the cyber cash money, the Bitcoin, the Litecoin, Ethereum, and others to pay. And it's easy now to pay for anything you want. And I guess that at least part of the audience, they are surfing in the darknet and they understand what is the size and what kind of thing you can get when you go to the darknet and when you go to the right site using, I don't know, DuckDuckGo, Tor, and etc., all the browsers that you can use over there. Another declaration is that cybercrime is going to be with us from now till the end of the days. Because I guess that from now till the end of the days, we are going to use electricity. And as we said, electricity, wherever there is electricity, this is part of the cyber space. Even more than that, you can take the analog to human race. Cyber or cyber security for the computer's domain is just like medicine to human beings. And if you think that one day human beings will not need to have doctors in order to cure themselves, maybe you might say that cybersecurity may be vanished one day. But if you still think that computers are going to be with us and people are going to need their doctors, then cybersecurity is going to be with us as just like criminality. And in cyber, we have actually criminals against computers, people against computers. And now we also having machine versus machines. We have computers fighting other computers, just like in visions of science fiction movies, Matrix and Terminator and etc. And it is not so far away from us, because we know AI was mentioned a couple of minutes earlier. And if you have a machine with a good AI, as we know that we already have in our world, then think of a scenario like that. You have a virus which has artificial intelligence capabilities. And what is the capability that he uses, that this virus uses? He learns what are all the antivirus software are doing against him. And he's independent in the area. And he can now get and collect a lot of knowledge about all the security developments, and he will live forever. He'll be there. He'll be smarter than all the defense softwares. So this is one thing that we see, and in order to take advantage over the criminals, that they think out of the box. Sometimes they don't even have a box. They just stay there in the unexpected world. And in order to fight or to defend against someone that is thinking out of the box, you need out of the box thinking when you design your defense. And it's not so easy, because I cannot tell you, okay, you need to be creative by order. You can't. I mean, you cannot be creative by order. I can't tell you, you must paint like Van Gogh. You must play like Mozart. This is something that you cannot do. But still, you need to fight those criminals with those methods, and you need to develop them in order to be one step ahead before the criminals. I'll tell two more things, and then I'll finish. Cybersecurity is the most privatized aspect of all security means, because if India is going to be attacked, I don't know, but all the countries that have border with India, Russia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, I don't know, if their military forces will invade India, then the Indian army will protect you. If there are criminals in Mumbai, in New Delhi, then the police will help you. What happened if there are cyber criminals, cyber terrors, or cyber attackers from those countries and from other countries that attack your assets? Who defends you? Who are you going to call when you have a cyber attack on your business? You finally woke up in the morning, you have a ransomware all around your computers, and you are going to call whom? The Indian military, the police forces, the Indian intelligence? This is privatized. This is your responsibility as the CEO of the company. And actually, this is something that you need to play as a general. And as a CEO, you are trained to bring value and money to the business, not to fight criminals and hackers. And last sentence, when you speak about cybercrime, and if there are so much criminals, cyber criminals, then I guess that if you will search the Indian jails, you will find a lot of computer geeks in these jails, right? Because we said the cyber crime market is bigger than the drug market. So I must find much more geeks and computer experts in jail than I will find drug dealers. I do not think this is exactly the situation in India. It is not exactly the situation also in Israel. And I think this is enough for the beginning of our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You raised a very interesting point and concluded with the point that you don't find enough geeks in the jail. Maybe that's what we need to aim for. Not the well-meaning one, but the people who stray on the wrong side of the law. But thank you for very interesting conversation, and especially when you mentioned about machine versus machine and how AI enable criminal elements, how AI can further strengthen the malwares, and especially the use of AI, both in terms of malware generation, but as well as also malware detection. So that is something which we need to work on. But with this, I would now take the opportunity of inviting Professor Chris to give her opening remarks. Professor Chris, I hope I said your name correctly. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Well, I'm a professor of cybersecurity in the Department of Computer Science at Oxford, so I'm a geek. I contribute to the general population of geeks, but those doing good, not bad. In addition to all of the teaching we do, helping build the future geek capacity, I wanted to share some thoughts with you all that emerged from some of the research we've been doing recently, particularly with reference to global issues. We all understand, don't we, that to really face risk in cyberspace, there has to be some way of attacking us, some attack surface that is exploitable by attackers, and that really constitutes our vulnerability. And whether you're thinking about that as a nation, as a global citizen of cyberspace, as a business, or as an individual, that really matters. And I wanted to share with you two key questions we've been looking at recently. The one is this, that many of us, for more years than we care to remember, have been working in cybersecurity since before the phrase was coined, back in the days of information security and information assurance. And we have witnessed lots of really quite considerably bad attacks and a significant evolution of the threat ecosystem in those years. So the questions we have to ask ourselves, amongst many questions, is there anything about the future, the way in which we're investing in technology today, the kinds of technology that is trending, that's going to change our environments across the globe, that's going to break our current methods, how we currently do cybersecurity, the kinds of controls you find in all of the best practice standards that underpin the marketplaces where we go and get our capacity from. And technologies that we've been looking at would include things like AI, as referred to earlier in this event, or those of us that work in the space, of course, would call that deep machine learning. Thankfully, we're not quite faced with artificially conscious machines just yet. Internet of Things, complete instrumentization of our environments throughout our critical infrastructures and beyond. And ultimately things like quantum computing and all of the algorithms and the data analytics that come together in these environments. And we've begun asking ourselves, is there anything we need to do, any significant capacity gap that we will face as a community that needs addressing? So that's one question, and I'll share some thoughts on that in a minute. The other is, though, when we think about this globally as a nation, do we have the right capacity? Are we doing the right things to plan for that capacity? And when I say plan, I mean really anticipate the threats. So is the way in which we do strategy and policy enabling us to see these threats emerging, to invest in the right kinds of education amongst our business leaders, to invest in the right kinds of regulation that sits around our markets, to stimulate the marketplace of technology providers and solutions providers that sit inside our economies and our critical infrastructures. And as we all know, in the face of the pandemic, we've never seen so lucidly the importance of cyberspace to the way in which we all live our lives. So it's certainly the case that probably there's much more critical infrastructure sat inside these technology environments than we've really given credibility to beforehand. So what does it mean to have the right capacity? Can we even anticipate that? And can we be sure that we will see these threats as they emerge and be able to respond and be resilient in the face of them? So there's a bunch of things I'm involved with. One is things like the CMM for Nations, where we look at how you benchmark national capacity and really trying to anticipate these new technology environments. We do stuff for online training of business leaders, but I wanted to share a couple of insights with you because I think they might be of interest to this conference. And one is very specifically around artificial intelligence. As we began to look at AI, and certainly we can see there's an awful lot of trend and case evidence that the threat actors are enabling themselves using these kinds of technologies and increasingly interested. So we can expect in the near to medium term an enhancement of potency of attacks being leveraged against us. And the kinds of aspects of the attacks that are going to become more potent are those that benefit from predictability of victims. So we've heard other speakers talking about adversarial AI, when it might be able to work out how we're actually strategizing to defend ourselves, or imagining a malware or a virus that's polymorphic and has AI capability, which enables it to evolve and change how it targets its victims. But very specifically, if we just park the ability of the threat to enhance its potency and think for 1 minute about all of the brilliant advances that our societies are going to have from using machine learning, it's going to be able to help us build smart cities, reduce carbon use, it's going to help us to deliver enhanced democracies, better predict effective medicines for health, better to predict global climate events. There's all of this upside from understanding our environments with much more precise insight. And how will we go about protecting that? And that, in fact, we should be concerned about the enhanced potency of attacks from AI. Absolutely, I fully agree. The other thing we really need to discuss is how we protect our machine learning assets when they sit inside so much of our economy's critical business, if you like. And the kind of attack surface that we can anticipate there is everything from, and we know that there are data poisoning attacks, the very data that we use to train this AI on, the initial models that come pre-trained, that will be sold into supply chains and used by other organizations. Once they're actually in use, some of them are generative, so they evolve over time to get better at predicting outcomes, better at supporting decision-making. Those sometimes will have humans in the loop, reinforcing their goals. So that's another attack surface. That's a human attack surface, remember? So it's not just tech, it's people too. The way in which we manage those machine learning assets inside our businesses, the way in which they support the processes and the decisions we make. How will we detect threats once they've been compromised? A speaker earlier said, look, we have to assume we are insecure. Absolutely. We all know cybersecurity is about the practice of insecurity and ensuring that you're resilient in the face of the threat. So when it comes to looking after ourselves, as these machine learning assets get deployed throughout our systems, we will need operational cybersecurity measures. And we will need to understand when we're under attack and what was the consequence. How did it ripple through our systems? What kind of harm has been done? And how do we actually recover from that situation? So that was one piece that I wanted to share with you all. And certainly if there's anyone involved in the conference that wants to get engaged on solving those issues, that we're actively considering that right now. And the other one is around systemic risk. And this is of real consequence more broadly. So machine learning will be inside our global supply chains, and we will need to work together to really understand how we protect those assets. But more broadly, are we building a cyberspace that has a level of hidden, aggregated risk? And that will come about not just through the use of things like machine learning, but through our common dependency on things like cloud suppliers, through proliferation of vulnerable tech throughout many different supply chains, all of that being common in terms of its technology or its technology-enabled service, but also the trust relationships that exist between our organizations. And more recently, we've seen those kinds of things be targeted by our attackers, particularly in areas like the methods we use to keep ourselves secure, to reduce our attack surface, our patch management, for example. If you can get malware inside the patch management processes that are subject to a little less scrutiny than other areas because they are somehow inside the boundary by virtue of being trusted. So they are actually an example of insider threat, but by virtue of supply chains and the security processes, then how do we keep an eye on these kinds of connections in our global supply chain? So from that perspective, we are going to need to work together, not just to really understand what it means to have capacity and to effectively deliver it, but we're going to need to work together in order to be able to anticipate new threats, to be able to plan for fire breaks, to begin to unravel where this risk might be aggregating across cyberspace so that we can actually begin to understand how this harm might propagate and build and to ensure that we remain resilient into the future. So thank you, and I give the floor to my fellow speakers.
Thank you, Professor Kreze. I think you made a very interesting point about how do we protect our assets on machine learning and what kind of aggregated risks they present and what needs to be done. A very interesting take on this, and thank you for bringing up those points. I now take the opportunity of inviting a person from the city where I am and also from the partner organization of Interpol. So I'll request Mr. Ilya Rozanov to come and give his opening comments.
Yeah, thank you very much for all presented information. It was quite useful. If I may, I will show a few slides here to support my presentation. Actually, the few major points were told here. First of it about threat actor-centric approach and attribution of all cyber crimes. And second, about moving these cyber threats from one industry to another, and even to the civil people, so to ordinary people. We in Group IB, we observe cybercrimes, we investigate them for almost 17 years, and what we see now that cybercrimes are a very effective business. All cybercrimes are now financially motivated. That means actually one major point that right now cyber criminals have resources, they have money, they have people inside, and they are capable of organizing very complex schemes. One of them I'd like to show to you today. We have detected this actually in Russia a few years ago in 2018. But right now it has evolved and going through the Europe, and we expect it to be expanded more. It's actually scam as a service. So previously there was one guy who were creating web pages, who were collecting money, who was responsible for overall operation. But right now you don't need to be skilled in any part of this business. You don't need to be a webmaster. You don't need to be to know how to do money laundering. You need to be like very low skilled. They will provide you some training, and actually what we see inside, there are people of 14 16 years old only. They are workers, what they call it, and topic starters. They took most part of the money from the victim, and they operate directly. They do some social engineering, they communicate, they attacked people using messengers. What actually happens? Third stage is creating the page on some marketplace, popular one, and selling some ordinary items. This may be iPhone, this may be an etagere like here, some bookshelf, and the price is quite ordinary or a little bit cheaper than the market. And actually after this, what we can do, it's about actually artificial intelligence here. It's about automatization. To create a phishing page, they don't do it with hands. They just send the link to the page to the Telegram bot, and Telegram bot creates the one-time phishing page. This page can be used to send to the potential buyer, and for the buyer, it's an ordinary phishing website. He will not recognize this, and he will do the payment on this website. This is actually very fast. The main trick and the force here is to make the victim to believe in the scheme. So they also ask some additional questions. They provide additional information. They do some psychology tricks. And these are examples from different countries, Romania, Bulgaria, very ordinary items. This is some Logitech thing. This is a bicycle. So nothing suspicious here. Even the price is ordinary. And this is the second part of the scam. Sometimes they do not create the page to sell something. They use an existing page of the seller, and in this case, the scammer represents as a buyer. They send this link to the seller and claim this is to receive the money. And this deceiving looks like the payment system page. And so actually they are attacking users of these marketplaces from both sides. And here are C2C marketplaces. They impersonalize even bank pages. Previously, you have seen Visa, which is quite general. But these are major banks in Russia, in Europe. This one exists in Czech as well. This is actually scam on the fly. Each page is created one time specifically for the user. It has some pre-filled data inside, so the name of the victim, for example, specific amount of money requested to make the payment, and it's destroyed immediately after the scam. So it's very hard to track them, even for cybersecurity organization, for police, to take down you actually have a few, like an hour maximum. After this, the scam will be completed and the page will be destroyed, and nobody will detect this. The geography is quite wide. You can see they are expanding more and more. They are hiring more and more people, and the trick is here that in this region, people are more or less aware. They are very careful about online payment. Although during the last pandemic year, a lot of efforts and a lot of steps were done, and people who were even far from online payment and online e-commerce are now ready to buy everything online. And in these countries, specifically in Asia, for example, people trust a lot these schemes. The profits there are much higher, so that's why people are looking for local guys to support some dialects, to be naturally looking for local um, population. And the top guy, who is actually owns the scheme, who has the scripts, who has ways to money laundering, he actually does nothing. He just provides access for a certain payment to the system. He trains people and stays on top of it for a certain percent. It's actually about 10 to 20% for each scammer deal. And overall, during the previous year, our calculation shows that 6.5 millions were in this industry, and actually only 3 or 4 groups operates in this. So you can understand this is the money which can be actually the fuel for them to rent more servers, to create more fast infrastructure, which will create more dedicated links, more patterns. They are ready to expand very rapidly and staying aside from a lot of jurisdictions. At the same time, pushing on some local habits, local templates, what people here in some countries are used to. Basically, that's all. Let me do a short point of conclusion. I'd like to highlight here that we must aware not only about attacks on the major business, on the infrastructure, on the critical objects like energy, transportation, but also on population. These measures should be provided both by government, by the local police. It also should, of course, include the international cooperation, Europol, Interpol, to track, to see the full picture here, to be able to attribute it properly. And the second efforts here should be applied by the brands themselves. They have their own security system inside. They have their anti-fraud system, anti-scam, anti-phishing teams. But that's actually their value. That these schemes damage both sides. They takes money from the users, from victims, and also damage the brands. And these brands were something that companies are investing like 10 years, sometimes 50 years. And efforts should be only combined efforts here can help to keep the cyberspace safe, because at the end of the day, it's all money which are growing. The amount of money creates the absolutely different side of economy, which is independent and trackable, and combined efforts are required to fight to move in this direction.
Thank you. Thank you. I would first of all like to thank you for demonstrating the complexity of today's cybercrime, the spread in terms of geography, and the kind of complicated methodologies which are being used by the cyber criminals. And thank you for illustrating it in such an interesting way. Thank you. I will now request Dr. Paul Vixen from Farsight to give his opening remarks. Dr. Paul Vixen.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for inviting me. I'll try to be brief, so I'd like to have a discussion of everything I've heard. So it is natural for any kind of an entity which can make decisions affecting its future to try to make a pattern of decisions which will improve its operating conditions. This is true of life, all life, plants, animals, microorganisms, humans. It's also true of corporate persons, and by this I include businesses, governments, militaries, crime syndicates. When a set of real persons bands together in some way with some common purpose, they become subject to that rule where the aggregate entity is going to seek to improve its operating conditions. So Richard Clarke published a book a year or two ago called The Fifth Domain. And in this case, what he means is a domain of force projection. And normally we think of force projection in terms of warfare, in other words, the affairs of nations. The other domains, of course, were land, sea, air, and space. And the fifth domain is information. And information has some very interesting characteristics from the point of view of force projection, and therefore planning our own operating conditions in the fifth domain. Chief among those characteristics is that since information is a virtual world, it's not subject to physical defense, right? The nations have militaries that can protect their citizens, their economy from physical force projection for the most part. But our militaries are not going to be able to protect our national borders in so-called cyberspace. What that has led to is a really suboptimal state of affairs for all of us. I don't have to have, in my place of business, I don't have to have anti-aircraft guns on the roof to make sure that some force is not projected against me by some nation who wants my company dead. I can count on my military to do that. But when that same nation is coming after me in the fifth domain, in cyberspace, in information, and projecting force virtually, I have to protect myself. Every business, every person has to protect themselves. We did not plan for this. When the world gradually adopted the internet and the idea of ubiquitous connectivity, there's a lot of things we did not anticipate, and this is an important one. And it is driving the headlines. It's driving what will be written in the history books about these decades. So I want to call attention to a particular risk. I don't want to go too deeply into the fifth domain, except to say where there is action, there is often provocation and reaction. And so the defining moment of this, I guess, last 10 years was in 2013, when a contractor to the National Security Agency of the United States decided to go rogue. He stole a bunch of information. He flew first to Hong Kong and then to Russia, and he released quite a bit of information about how national security is executed by the United States of America. These revelations were shocking to many. Those working in national security have long known that this is the way the world works. So what was shocking was the disclosure, not the information that was disclosed. But to many who were outsiders, they had no idea that this is how the world worked. And they don't have any idea that this is how the world has always worked. This is what governments do. And I think one of the reasons for the shock was naivete, ignorance. But another was that this was finally happening in the fifth domain, where there are no holds barred. Nation states can do whatever no one can stop them from doing. And that's actually international law in a nutshell. So anyway, there has been a provoked reaction, and that is from the Internet Standards community, which we call the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. And so their leadership, which is all volunteer, it's all internally nominated, internally regulated. There's no government control of any of this. This is a cooperative worldwide team of people who has brought us the protocols which define cyberspace, or at least define the capabilities and the risks of cyberspace. So that the leadership decided to do first one thing, then another. They said ubiquitous monitoring, pervasive monitoring, was a threat, and the internet must evolve in order to counter that threat. And they therefore instructed every working group to find a way to measure the risks of the protocols they're responsible for and to mitigate those risks with protocol evolution. And this has been done. And I'll call your attention to two things. One is DNS over HTTPS. And I'm sorry for the buzzwords, but HTTPS is a secure protocol developed originally for e-commerce over the web. It's how web browsers talk to web servers. And I'm going to come back to HTTPS in a moment, but I just want to point out that it's intended to be a secure protocol, immune to either perturbation or surveillance. And by moving DNS into that protocol, the explicit goal was to prevent on-path interference in DNS operations. Unfortunately, on-path interference includes corporate security, including corporate security that is in the interests of regulation. Many corporations in many nations are required to control what their employees do online. There are laws, there's compliance, there's a lot going on, which becomes impossible if you can't see the traffic that is leaving your corporate network. And this was not foreseen by the leadership of IETF, or to the extent that it was foreseen, excuses have been offered. In other words, yes, we understand that's a problem. However, there is a bigger problem, and we have to solve the bigger problem, which is pervasive monitoring. So this groups together all on-path actors, including your own laptop's operating system, including your corporate firewall. And it's bad to treat every on-path actor as though they could be a criminal or some kind of nation state performing pervasive monitoring. Nevertheless, that is the world we are entering. Second strong implication here is that a hardened protocol. The security negotiation portion, which is called TLS, Transport Layer Security, has long been open to perturbation in a very strange form, which is a next generation corporate firewall, which is able to see that an internal laptop or server, a smartphone, whatever, something inside the corporate network is trying to reach an external web service of some kind. And the next-gen firewall has been able to answer and say, I am your distant endpoint. Here is a certificate by which you should trust me. And that means that the outbound connection is reduced to clear text at the border so that it can be inspected, logged, compliance enforced, and so on. And then, if the policy does not forbid that transaction, then the next-gen firewall regenerates the connection to the true external service and represents itself as follows. It says, I am the client. And that means the entire connection is visible at the corporate firewall, as it must be for some policy reasons. However, the same capability has been available to authoritarian nation states. As an example, the Great Firewall of China uses the same mechanism in order to effect its cybersecurity law. And of course, the National Security Agency has been able to use this in various targeted instances, which the disclosures of 2013 made plain. So the web itself has also been hardened. We have a new protocol called QUIC, Q-U-I-C, and the details don't matter, except that with QUIC and with TLS version 1.3, which has now been standardized, is now on its way into the world's economy, and with a particular feature called Encrypted Client Hello. Some of you may have heard this as ESNI. It's now ECH, so the alphabet soup is reorganizing. Under that system, none of this will be possible. Next-gen firewalls will be blind. Law enforcement surveillance using warrants that were issued by judicial authorities will not be possible. Now it's clear to see that this will benefit the privacy of some individuals, but it will also remove the world's ability to govern itself in the fifth domain. And that's the goal. Governments exist for a reason. They exist in opposition to some trends, some forces. They're not created for the sole purpose of controlling a population. And the purpose of that government, of course, is at odds with the purpose of many corporate persons, criminal, other nation states, corporate, commercial. So these nation states exist in an equilibrium. As I said earlier, they literally do whatever they can get away with. And once they discover what the limits are, what they can get away with, they operate at that equilibrium, periodically probing to see if there's more headroom available, periodically being pushed back. But in the fifth domain, the border overlaps. What you can get away with and what your adversary can get away with go past each other. So our defense perimeters are no longer, there isn't a no man's land. Our defense perimeter is deep inside other people's territory. So this is a problem. It's a problem that we created a worldwide international economy without any idea of how we would govern it or whether it would govern us, how we would cope with its risks. So most recently, the Internet Engineering Task Force leadership has published another standards document, which is titled The Internet is for the Users. And this is to justify the idea that everything between the user and the services they access should be completely encrypted, completely unintelligible to any on-path adversary. I wish to note that this includes the antivirus software on your laptop. That's an on-path adversary. So the only party who will be able to witness most of these transactions is the web browser, because of course the internet may be for end users, as the IETF now claims, but end users do not have a Wi-Fi chip in their brains. They have to speak to the internet through something, and it is the web browser. So the web browser will be the new platform. It will be the only place where controls like monitoring, antivirus, and so forth can be controlled. Every other method of controlling what is done is being systematically frustrated and reduced. So the web browser and the browser makers will have total control of the fifth domain, other than the far end and the services that are being accessed they will be party to these transactions. No one else, whether for legal purposes or illegal purposes, whether for good or for evil, whether for defense or offense, no one else will have access to the fifth domain. This should concern us. Thank you again for inviting me. That concludes my prepared remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Paul Vixen. Thank you for bringing out this important issue of fifth domain, and especially from the law enforcement perspective, I would say something which we have been raising at various IETF forums relating to TLS 1.3, how it is going to make our lives so much more difficult. And thank you for explaining it with such simplicity that I would say that this kind of explanation definitely is music to our ears, because this helps in pointing out the difficulties which we are going to face in future. It is not only the judicial orders which are required, but it is also the basically for surveillance, it would require concurrence of both parties at both ends for us to make at least one party of them to be aware of this happening. Otherwise, we will not be able to do any kind of man in the middle kind of surveillance. With this, I would now request Dr. Ashley to make her presentation. Thank you.
So I'm presenting on behalf of CCSI. We're a group of UN-sanctioned practitioners. Specifically, my background is in the cryptocurrency space as an entrepreneur. I was involved in the Ethereum project, and then I started to see that there were a lot of negative implications without proper regulation. So I got involved with CCSI to start to understand regulations for the space from a UN sanctions context. We have been researching, actually goes back to 1999 in Angola with the unit of rebels and using email to coordinate arms transfers. And we started to realize that it was such an efficient way to conduct transfers, and it was making things to be a lot more easy for the rebels. And when we contact Google to say, hey, why are you providing essentially violating arms embargoes with email? Of course, we got nothing. And so this sort of was the beginning of understanding what's really going on here. Can digital technologies be weaponized? And what about when we do have, the highest level of law with the UN sanctions not being respected by the technology companies? We saw it again in Somalia with the creation of websites that united a global diaspora, so a global group of people who were sending money back to fund the militias because the internet allowed them to easily create websites and easily communicate. And then with the rise of Al-Shabaab, really figuring out propaganda for the first time using the internet, which of course we've seen with ISIL, with beheading videos that have been used to use the internet to spark terror, to give more rise to more recruitment and more sophisticated recruitment now with chat rooms that target people that are lonely. And then today, which a few people have mentioned, we have cryptocurrency hacks where $2 billion in cryptocurrencies have gone to North Korea is what's estimated. And in Iran, they've become really sophisticated at stealing like softwares for producing missiles and other things that violate the UN agreements. Not specifically in a UN context, but I've also been doing a lot of research about Russia cyber occupations, we call them. So basically using cyber technologies and cyberspace to occupy Crimea, to occupy Donetsk, and violate country sovereignty, not by using physical force first, but by using disinformation, using different tactics to change the actual architecture of people's minds and the local economies to be more in favor of the Russian occupation. And that's really our most recent interest today. So we are specifically looking at this from a UN sanctions framework. The largest agreement that we have between all of the countries. Of course, other people have mentioned that there are issues with mobilizing UN action, but just to start, we try to think about it in sort of two categories. One is when information technologies are weaponized in terms of massive critical infrastructure attacks, whether to kill or whether to seriously country. We have many examples of these from different threat actors, but we have no UN sanctions response, which basically says to the threat actors that, you know, if you conduct these types of attacks, you're basically not going to have any threat. It's a problem then for us to think about the potency of then this UN sanctions system now that we have cyber aggressions becoming more and more popular. We have seen some UN sanctions response in terms of stealing, you know, cryptocurrencies, stealing blueprints like intellectual property for proliferation purposes. But in terms of recruitment, which of course the internet is a great tool for recruitment, there has been no response. Technology companies have basically been told to self-regulate, which of course I think most people here see that there's also problems with taking this self-regulatory approach. It's not a cohesive, comprehensive global response to the threat that everyone knows that we're facing. So we have information on our website. If you go to civsociety.global/cyber-threats, and that's a really good description of where we are currently. As I mentioned, we're currently running a working group for the cyber occupation that we're observing in Russia. So people who are interested in things like that, please email me. I think that in terms of where we can go from here, basically creating more ways for people to develop multilateral responses, understanding that there's difficulties with doing that in the UN sanctions system. There's different geopolitical views about regulating the internet. However, smaller countries still need to then arm themselves and take measures to have defense. So those are the kinds of things that we're interested in, helping smaller countries who don't have a lot of protection not turn into cyber rogue nations because they're not creating frameworks to protect themselves. That is a big deal for us, number one. Number two is helping to develop more kind of mindful regulations that multiple countries could sign on and adopt together. I think we have to do the smaller country protection first, but that's definitely a place that we would go. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ma'am Taylor, for giving a very interesting comparative chart on the UN sanction responses to various kinds of cyber aggressions, which brought to light some interesting insights on that. And with that, I would request our last speaker for this panel, Mr. Ken Moe, to give his opening remarks. Mr. Ken Moe.
Thank you very much to everyone for the invitation to be here and the pleasure to actually be in the presence of such great people. Thank you very much. My talk today is going to be on what I'm doing in Canada to actually solve the problems for businesses around cybersecurity. What I'm not presenting is a magic bullet. It may or may not work for other countries, other jurisdictions and stuff. It's just because I understand the Canadian market very well and Canadian businesses, and so my presentation is really based around what we're actually doing to help solve these problems. So it's going to bring up my presentation. So I just wanted to go across some statistics that we have from a Canadian perspective, and it really affects the global market. Just to give you a little bit of background of where I come from, I actually started in technology back in 1993, and the first thing that I was dealing with when I first came in was an absolute abundance of viruses that were affecting different businesses that we were working with, which kind of intrigued. It was an intriguing situation because I couldn't understand like where all these things were coming from. So I started researching to figure out where this was, and I actually read a paper from Norton Antivirus, as they were known back then, talking about how Bulgaria actually was the country that was supplying some of the most amount of viruses. And they talked about a particular person, individual whose name he went by the Dark Avenger, and he actually created what he called a mutation engine, which allowed him to be able to take the original virus that he created, and the mutation engine would just continually adapt that virus so it looked different every time. And so, of course, people were writing antivirus software. This was defeating their software every time, because these are written by humans. There's scripts looking for very specific patterns. You keep altering the pattern, and all of a sudden now you can't see the virus anymore. He managed to create over 1 billion of these. And this was back in the late 80s and the early 90s that this was happening. So by the time I'd actually got around to reading about it, it was already kind of done. And there's lots of examples of this, like the very first IDS tools that were actually plugged in for use was in the early 90s, was when they realized that, certain nation states were already in networks that were, particularly universities that were, doing heavy research into R&D, and which actually kicked off a lot of the migration of the intellectual property that's been lost over the years. In fact, there was a website called Crack99 back in 2008. They sold over $100 million worth of stolen software. These were softwares that were developed, huge investments, and the softwares in some cases were tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy. But on this website, you could buy them for pennies on the dollar. And so this issue that we have is been in the making for a very, very long time. It's really only in the last few years that it's getting really the attention that it deserves. But people that have been in this business a long time have really seen the rise of nation states and criminal actors who just have basically free will to do whatever they want with organizations. So my background. I started off in technology. I've worked with almost all of the major security technologies that are out there. I was doing threat hunting back in the day before it was even a term. I was a next-gen technology instructor back in the mid-2000s. And so along with I got my network engineering certifications back in the mid-90s as well. So I've seen this business from a lot of different angles, and I'm also a voracious reader of everything that's cyber. I get tons of news feeds that come in every morning. I act as leadership for a lot of different companies across the country. And so I try to make sure that I'm always on top of what's going on, because I use that as a way to educate the organizations that we deal with. But some of the statistics, like this is last year's number, actually, just to put things in perspective. Like Canada has approximately 1.3 million businesses. And actually 99.5% of those businesses are classified as small to medium. We have a very small footprint of what we call, enterprise level companies that are, large or global in terms of the way they operate. And so when you see numbers like 20% or 22% of businesses have been hit by ransomware, for instance, as in the statistic provides us, that's around about 260,000 businesses in a population of 1.3 million. And these are last year's numbers. These are not, they haven't been updated since. This is a colossal amount of businesses that are actually being hit by ransomware. I've been involved in a lot of ransomware cleanup operations where we've been brought in to try to get the companies back up and running. The bills for these things are sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The average global is around about 4 million. But the thing you have to ask yourself all the time is, because I read voraciously about this. I've been involved in hundreds of companies, met thousands of really great people. But at the end of the day, all of these companies, they have firewalls, they've got endpoint solutions, they've got all kinds of things in there. So you have to realize that, you realize at some point that, this generally the way we go about things is absolutely broken. There's no cohesiveness around the way we operate with cybersecurity. A lot of that's to do with the cybersecurity professionals that are in the business, because they all come from different backgrounds. Some people are very technical, others are very administrative. There's no sort of collaboration between them. If you add to the fact that there's definitely a global shortage of skilled cybersecurity people, it's just compounding the issue over and over and over. And so when you look at statistics like this, you have to ask yourself, like, what's wrong? There is definitely something wrong about the way we go about doing these things. So about 3 years ago, after, you always feel like you're running and running and running in this business. You always feel like you're running to keep up with what's going on. But about 3 years ago, I kind of stopped and said, there's got to be a different way to do this. There has to be a better way to do this. And when I say things are broken, things are broken in terms of IT departments, for instance, typically because the resources are not there, they're not skilled in cybersecurity. On top of that, they're not really typically business people either, so they're not able to take what they know and then turn it into business logic that a business can understand in terms of defining strategy. And so all of these things are gaps where issues like ransomware and IP theft and things like that can take place because there's no cohesion in really what's going on with these things. I often hear the terms, cybersecurity needs to be aligned to the business. And, not that I don't disagree with that, but these are things that, if you're an enterprise, you can understand that, and you probably have the resources to make good on that. But when you're a small to medium business, getting alignment to the business, I don't even know how to even come up with that. Like, how do you even define that? The business themselves, like the leadership teams, are not technical. They don't really understand cybersecurity. So they're not providing the leadership to the IT groups to figure out what the strategy should be. And conversely, they have the same issue being able to explain this as well. And so the disconnect is all over the place. And then on top of that, if you look at the amount of technologies that are out there in the marketplace, there's absolutely an overwhelming amount of technologies that people, supposedly to buy and bring in and solve world hunger. Well, which of these technologies are you supposed to buy? How do you put these things together? The challenge around doing these things it's just enormous. And so these are things that we have to be able to solve ultimately. So what I did was I basically created a program that companies are following. It's all using industry best practices and standards. The program that I put together about 3 years ago, none of it includes anything that's proprietary. Everything is off the shelf. These are tools and techniques that are already in place globally, and a lot of companies are using them. But what I've learned to understand is that your average small to medium sized company have never heard of these different frameworks and standards. Like ISO 27001 is probably the most recognized of all of these frameworks and standards, but not many people are really actually using them. But they actually do solve a lot of problems, because what we're seeing is, instead of using industry best practice, what we're seeing is a lot of industry best guessing. People are buying technologies, they're trying this, they're trying that, they're doing this. Oh, that didn't work, let's try something else. And none of this is really working, as the statistics really show. Because when you look at what the cyber criminals are doing, I mean, the nation states and cyber criminals, they're highly organized, right? They're highly structured, they're highly motivated, and they're highly financed. And one of the things that I took this out of a book that I read actually a couple of years ago, and it was quite right, is that you'll never hear them say we don't have budget for this. But it's a common refrain when I talk to organizations that they always flat out say we don't have budget for that. But what I learned to understand over time was, when they say I don't have budget for that, what they mean is I don't really know what to budget for. And when you learn to understand that, then you suddenly realize, okay, if I put together something where you can understand what the costs are associated for security based on industry best practice, now you can start budgeting for these things. Now, in a lot of cases, when we're proposing the use of industry standards, the one that we use in particular is the Center for Internet Security's Critical Security Controls. We kind of eat, sleep, and breathe that particular standard, and there's lots of reasons why we use that. But a lot of these standards are too big for a lot of small to medium-sized companies. But what I always say to them, and it's not the size of the framework that you need to worry about, it's really the size of the remediation. If we're talking about this being, a domain of warfare, I typically have looked at this domain as sort of a warfare type of issue that we have. What we need to provide these customers is the information that they need in order to make intelligent decisions as what they should do for security. But it needs to be based on a structured approach. And the only way you can do that is you have to use standards. And so we really, really push the idea of standards. In order to really propagate this message, there was no way I was going to be able to do this on my own. The team that we have are amazing, but even with them, it still wasn't going to be enough to sort of start pushing this message out. So what we did was we decided that we would, instead of opening up offices all over the country, that we would just partner with IT organizations that were looking to add security for their customers and didn't want to actually build their own security practice. And so what we started doing was, through relationships, we started finding, like-minded organizations right across the country. And we've set up shop in every single major business center across the country. What I do is I actually train these organizations on what these security practices are, what are best industry practices that they should really follow. And they in turn are helping me to educate their customers as well. Because the thing is that there's no way that you can ever train a customer, or nor would they want to understand what the nation states and what these cyber criminals are doing. Their levels of sophistication are way beyond a discussion that you can have with these people. So what we do is we just follow the approach that let's focus on what we have, that we have control of. Because we don't have any control over what nation states do or what cyber criminals do. Our governments are not banded together to be able to provide oversight and overreach and protections around what these nation states are doing. As quite rightly was pointed out before, they basically can get away with anything and everything that they want to do. So we really just focus on what we have control over. So if we can control our processes and people through education and knowledge and have them really understand what the industry is recommended it should be doing, this is a tactic that really, really works well. I have the technical knowledge to deliver on every single thing that's that these frameworks require. I don't do that anymore nowadays, but our team delivers on these things. But we work in conjunction with the partners that we have, and the customers love it because they have an existing partnership that they've learned to love and trust over these years. But now the partnership is expanded because of what we provide for them. But really, what we're providing is knowledge. Data is not knowledge. Just plugging widgets in and talking about technical things and speeds and feeds and stuff. This is just not a strategy that we do. So I try to make sure that we really approach this from a business level. And this works well for government agencies, for any size enterprise. And these things, because they're not really particular to any size organizations, for us, it's a one-stop shop. Where it's really benefiting us is where we're talking with municipalities or towns and cities in these different provinces, as well as school boards, library boards, different government agencies. One of the things I always explain to them is that if you follow this standard, all of a sudden it solves a ton of problems, because a lot of these areas in Canada are very rural. There's only very few areas that are very populated. And so getting resources, the kind of resources they need, especially in the cybersecurity world, is almost next to impossible. So what we've been able to do with these organizations is to say, if you're all working to a common standard and you all understand the risks that you have because of this, you can now share resources to help each other. Maybe you have a project that you need to do that's going to take more than one person. Now all of a sudden, these guys are collaborating in a way that they hadn't done before because they're using a common industry standard. The other thing that we talk about with global companies that we work with is that, because these are global standards, if you've got offices all over the world, you've got a Deloitte or one of the big consulting companies can come in. They know these standards all across the globe. It's not, something that's proprietary to a particular area. And so, again, it's solving a lot of problems for us. But really, ultimately, the goal was to educate. That's really what it comes down to, was to educate. And also to provide some discipline. One of the things that you have to have in warfare is discipline. Without it, you're never going to, you're already going to lose the fight before you start. And so what we do is we make sure that, we look at a constant improvement cycles for organizations, review their practices, and also make sure that they have incident response programs in place as well, and that they're tested. Because nobody's under the illusion that you're not going to be breached. And so we work on the basis that you are going to get breached, but what are you going to do about it? How fast are you going to react? Who are all the people that are involved in these in that exercise? And so by educating these organizations and preparing them the best we can, you know, we're putting them in a much stronger position, because the thing is where they lack the knowledge about security, this is their greatest weakness. But because of the way we approach this at a business level, we're actually getting buy-in from the senior leadership as well, because it's solving problems around, you know, how much is this going to cost? Where are our gaps? How long is this going to take to fix? Who's going to do the work? Is it us, someone else, a combination of both? You know, what about resourcing? Do we need to hire more people? Do we need to outsource more of this? So it answers a lot of these questions. We've basically built battle plans for these organizations. We don't just do assessments where we go in and say, you know, do you have this? No, okay, you know, that's a gap. What we do is we take that one step further and we actually create plans for them that could be 3 or 4 or 5 years in the making to address these gaps, because we have to be very sensitive to the fact that not everybody has the budgets and the resources that are required in order to, you know, execute on these things. And so these plans could be typically multi-year. But the point being is that they are a plan, as opposed to nothing, which is most of what these organizations have today. We're trying to stop them from shooting from the hip, try to put in some discipline, some structure, and educate the organization. One of the things that I hadn't anticipated in doing this was that once these companies actually start to learn to understand what security is actually all about, they develop an emotional attachment to the process, because they now feel empowered to be able to act on their own and to make sure that their security practices are up to date. But most importantly, they're actually getting buy-in from leadership, because the leadership now understands where they're at too. They understand where the risks are, they understand where the gaps are, but they also understand how they're going to fix this as well. And so the whole organization is working as one to go in that direction. And without that, you're always destined to fail. So again, like, it's not a silver bullet, but it's definitely way more than what organizations have. These things have been around for a long time. The adoption is very low. It's very unfortunate, but we're trying to change that through partnerships across the country. And interestingly, what's happening is we're getting more and more interest from potential partner companies, because in most cases they don't want to build their own. It's a very complex undertaking to build your own security practice with all the things that we do and all of the skill sets that we have. And so they don't want to do that. They'd rather partner with somebody that they can work with, that they could trust, to be able to bring real value and to their end clients, and which is what we're doing. You know, if anyone were listening at the moment, I thank them profusely, because they believed in this vision, and they're helping me to execute this across the country and bring real leadership, which is what's lacking in a lot of cases. Actually, these small communities, or the communities that we work in, they just don't have the leadership from a cybersecurity perspective to actually guide them in knowing what it is that they should be doing. You know, architecture and everything that we do for them is helping to reduce the risks that they have in their environment. So this is what we're doing while we're waiting for the rest of the world to come together to help us protect us from these other organizations through, you know, legal means and compliance, and, you know, today's equivalent of the Non-Proliferation Treaties Act, or some equivalent to something like that. So we're really just dealing with what we have control over, and it works very effectively, actually. So. And the only thing I would leave as a takeaway from this is the Center for Internet Security. The book that I read originally was The Art of War. That helped me to understand and devise my own framework around security, long before any of these standards came into being. But this framework that we use, this is our new art of war. This is what we're using in order to help our clients defend themselves. I call it the defensive edition, because it's not an offensive way to combat cybersecurity problems. But lastly, what I would say is that what I tell these companies is that you'll never become an expert in what nation states and what criminal organizations are doing. But what you can do is to become an expert at what you do. if you have good tight processes and you drilled on them and everybody is aware of what they need to do and become an expert in what you have control over, this is going to take you a long way to helping you to be secure. So don't worry about what these other guys are doing. That's what my job is. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mohit. Very interesting presentation. You mentioned some of the numbers which were really eye-opening. 20.42% of companies impacted by ransomware. That is 1 in every 5 companies is impacted by ransomware, which is a very significant amount of number. And I think you raised the very right issue about educating and creating more awareness and making them self-sufficient to tackle this. I would like to ask you one question, Mr. Mohit. What are you doing to create more competitors for you, more rivals for you? Because your effort itself may not be sufficient, because there are so many more businesses who need this kind of help. What are you doing to create your own rivals in this area?
That's a really great question, actually. And again, I have to really thank our partners that we work with, because one of the ways that we're propagating the message is that in coming up with this vision, what I wanted to do was to use it as a way to train the partners that we have so they understand good security practices, because that's just not their domain that they work in. But in turn, what they've been able to do with the information that they have is been able to put me in front of their customers. And so prior to COVID, I would do a lot of in-person speaking engagements. But nowadays, I do a lot of webinars, a lot of podcasts. And the whole idea is to really propagate the message that, there is a solution there. I'm not telling you it's bulletproof and that, it's a magic bullet and it's going to solve everything. But the exercise in risk reduction, that's the thing that I've learned to understand over the years, is that the exercise is in risk reduction. It's not risk elimination. The more difficult you can make it for organizations, and I know this to be true because I built and rebuilt security operations centers. I know this business inside out. One of the first organizations that I ever worked with, they were a $4 billion company. We were a 4-man shop. They were the largest importers of wines and spirits in the world. They had to have a 99.999% uptime. And the way we designed the network for them, and we're using a constant level of constant procedures around improving their process and stuff. In the 11 years that I was actually working with them as a managed security provider, it never got breached once. We had technologies in that were taking care of denial of service, and these are the sorts of things that we learned from the past. And so this is how this information that I got from before, and the knowledge and experience, is what I'm passing on through the use of social media and mediums, posting blogs, writing articles, and really just constantly educating our partners. And through word of mouth, they're actually telling about their friends about what we're doing. And we're getting a lot more interest from partners around the country to actually come on board with us, which is really, really, so it's really the in-person speaking engagements, webinars wherever I can, podcasts, all that kind of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Mohit. Thank you for a very interesting explanation. So we have completed the presentations by all the panelists. So we have some questions, but I have some of my own questions. So first of all, let me go to Madam Reddy and ask one of my old questions. And ma'am, I asked the same question when you were here in Singapore. And I'll again ask the same question. How optimistic are you with initiatives like GDE or Digital Peace Initiative or your Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace in arriving at norms accepted by, I won't say everybody, but majority of them?
I think, Madan, what's changed since we last discussed the subject is it's become clear that it's harder now, given the geopolitical tensions that have come up, to come up with something that's going to be universally acceptable. I agree with you there. But I also think, we should be patient, because the real dialogue on international cooperation on cybersecurity started, I would say, in a very serious manner about 15 years ago, when many of these initiatives had their first beginnings, and in an intensive form for about 10 years. If you see that the first UNGG was 2010, it's also the time that people started to really talk very seriously about cyber threats, cyber security, etc. If you think about how long it took to reach agreement on how to limit nuclear proliferation, it took much longer. I mean, you had the A-bomb attack in 1945, and it was at least a couple of decades after that that really serious efforts began, and then the beginnings of what would later become the IAEA started. And whether it's UNCLOS, whether it's ICAO, we've talked about cyber being the fifth domain. When you look at the other domains, it's taken a very, very long time to negotiate these agreements. So I am not surprised that it has taken this long, and that there is still a long way ahead. I think the trick is to get, maybe to start with like-minded groups, regional groups, and eventually when people see that this model works and that we're able to pool our resources, our knowledge, and our analysis to successfully combat more cyber attacks, there will be an incentive really for at least, I would say, a basic minimum of some kind of agreement on some fundamental issues. I can see a lot of scope for agreement on financial services, because that is something that affects everyone. And how can we stop cybercrime that's specifically finance oriented? So I would say it may become sectoral, it may become partial in the initial stages, but I don't think we should stop talking. I think the dialogue is very important. For instance, I'm finding the UN is far more active now than it's ever been. I find that there's far more understanding of what are the threats in the cybersphere than there's ever been. And I think there's more willingness to understand the point of view of the different stakeholders. And therefore, there's more chances of coming up with comprehensive solutions. So it is a problem, and it will take time, but I am somehow convinced that we have no choice except to finally formulate norms and regulations which will be binding and which will be global, if we really want to make this a safe space for everyone. I hope that answers the point.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm still very optimistic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ma'am, you mentioned about fifth domain, and that takes me to my next question to Dr. Paul Vixen. You talked a lot in depth about the fifth domain. I would like to ask you about what are your views? How can we combat the fake news part of the problem which we are facing almost everywhere now?
Well, fake news is a sort of a special crossroads of pain when you want to talk about controls, because we can't have governments telling the press what they can publish and what they can't. The press exists as a counter to government power and the abuse of that power. So I think the government can require labels, but it ultimately will have to be regulated as a commercial activity, so that if you are in the position of addressing a large set of people, then the definition of free speech is going to have to be a little bit more responsible. And unfortunately, when you talk about how to do that, you open the door to authoritarianism. So this is going to be a very difficult problem. If we could solve it at the edge, in other words, where the information is consumed, that would, of course, be better. But as we've learned from the last at least 5 years, think about various campaigns that have led to populist uprisings and administrations. People like their bubbles. At the edge, fake news is welcomed. And so as long as you have sort of news organizations or commercial publishers of any kind, which would include Facebook, for example, who want those readers, they want those watchers, they want the eyeballs for commercial revenue purposes, whether it's surveillance or advertising, whatever it may be. And then you have a lot of people who really want to be catered to in that way, and they want their news biased and they want it filtered. They do not want a kind of an objective, complete spectrum of information out of which they can draw their own conclusions. That there's no great draw for that in a lot of parts of the world. We're not going to be able to solve this. There's no amount of regulation that will change what people want. So, this is probably a multi-generational problem having to do with nations who want to be truly free. In other words, free of this type of influence campaign, will have to mandate the teaching of critical thinking in all schools so that we can begin at the age of reason, even the age before the age of reason, to bring up generations who just naturally don't want to participate in fake news. But right now, those people don't exist in large enough numbers.
Thank you, Dr. Vixen, for explaining it in such clear terms. We have received some questions on the chat. I will take one. It's what type of cybersecurity protocols does a company need to evolve if it has a sophisticated AI and is in the business of data management? Professor Chris, if you would like to take and maybe talk about we are seeing discussions on norms for use of AI, or may I say ethical use of AI. And if you would like to take this question.
Yes, of course. I'll start by saying a few words about that point on ethical use of AI. Of course, any business using machine learning assets needs to give good consideration to consequences of knowledge discovery, how they manage data, all of the things we would currently do in any other kind of data handling, data management environment. The thing that's different in the context of AI and deep machine learning is, in this situation, we're exploring learning new, potentially weak signals, potentially connections and correlations between data points that human beings would not have historically been able to elucidate without the help of these kinds of technologies. So we may be introducing new kinds of risk and creating new kinds of value at the same time. So that's something to be aware of. When it comes to actually protecting your machine learning assets, at the moment, best practice or leading practice in the cybersecurity community would be very focused on existing risk controls. There are some very specific attacks we know about to do with poisoning data sets that some of these algorithms are using for learning. We also know that some businesses are training their systems using data sets that are available in open source, and some of those open source data sets have been compromised. So you have to give some consideration to the source of the data that you're using to train your systems. Outside of that, current mechanisms around access control and essentially placing your trust somewhere. So usually within your security teams and your compliance teams, and getting them to protect the asset in the same way they would protect any other asset. The thing you need to be mindful of is that we do not currently have a mechanism for determining if that asset has been compromised, unless we have seen that attack come through the network in the normal way, and our intrusion detection systems caught it. In terms of looking to the future, if somebody was interested in investing in state-of-the-art, then I would look to the classical ways in which we do insider threat detection and see how they might be applicable to this kind of technology, because it's essentially on the inside of the network. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chris. I would also like to add that in terms of preparation of norms for ethical use of AI, Interpol is partnering with UNICRI, and especially with regard to ethical use of AI by law enforcement agencies. So they are preparing toolkits in this regard, which can help law enforcement agencies to see how to utilize AI and also working on use case scenarios. At this stage, I will go to Mr. Trainer and seek his inputs. What is his views that in light of, let me say, some of the future and some of not so future technologies like quantum, IoTs, 5G, dark web, what do you see, and cryptocurrencies, obviously, what do you see? Is it, will there be a move for more anonymization, or do you see attribution becoming easier in future? What is your take? Or let me put it simply, will the lives of law enforcement become easier, or we are ahead for more tough times?
Yeah, actually, I would say the contradiction between privacy and security, privacy and safety will come along with us to the end of the days. Because if we want more security, we need to give up some of our privacy. Well, I don't like to put my privacy, off, and I want to keep it. And the work of police, I guess, will come much harder. But that means that actually states and governments should invest more efforts in the power of police forces and law enforcement forces. I don't like them to be more aggressive or more. I just want them to keep, in the technology race, one step ahead the others, the bad guys. And if I look around, if I look at all police organizations all over the world, I don't think they are one step ahead of the criminals in the cyber domain. Still a big gap to go through. And you've mentioned some technologies as cars, IoT, and etc. So we all talk about ransomware. We talked about the next generation firewall. By the way, the WannaCry had some kind of mechanism versus that antivirus, this versus next generation firewall. But now think of a ransomware that will hit you when you are in your connected car, not even your autonomous car, but your connected car, and suddenly you hear some strange voice coming from your media system saying, "Hey, this is John the criminal. I have just hacked your car. If you don't send me 3 Bitcoins right now to this wallet address, then your car will keep running. I just turn off the braking capability of your vehicle." This is a scenario which is not fantastic. If you look at the technology of any car, if you look at ECUs in each car, the small computers that actually assemble the network in a car, then you understand that this is a real threat. So I guess that we're going to see more and more sophisticated crimes in the future. I'm optimistic. I'm not going to stop using my car or stop flying in an airplane. If I start talking about threats, cyber threats to airplanes and to other sophisticated networks, we will have to spend here the rest of the night. But I think that much more efforts should be invested in cyber capabilities of law enforcement, and that will not hurt our privacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kirner, especially mentioning about building the capabilities of law enforcement agencies, which is a critical factor in this fight against cybercrime. We have received some questions on the chat. I will address this question to Mr. Rozanov. Mr. Rozanov, the question is that, does the UTXO model of cryptocurrency lead to a major financial privacy breach? Will it help clean up the darknet or lead to fall of the financial market? It has a follow-up question. The takedown of Alpha Bay was a major learning exercise that proved integral to understanding the depth of the cyber world. What form of interdepartmental international cooperation can lead to bringing more forms of cyber markets to light? I'm asking this question to you because I know Group IB has been partnering with many other agencies and to tackle this kind of issues.
So yeah, we really monitor a lot of dark forums and deep forums. This helps to attribute the attacks a lot. And actually, regarding the previous question of is it easier right now to attribute and track cyber criminals or harder? It is true that a lot of GDPR restrictions and the privacy information laws limited the information available in the internet, but actually the amount of information is still growing. And what's surprising me that each new breach is more and more massive. So previously we were speaking about thousands of leaked accounts. Now it's millions. Possibly this is coming because of the GDPR, because GDPR includes the duty to disclose any breach. And regarding bringing more forms of cyber market to light, actually most of them are open. If we're speaking about traditional cybercrime, if we're not going into deep hacking, and to cybersecurity experts, they are open to read even without the browser. The more light can be done with more cooperation between countries, because some of these forums are active for tens of years. They are placed in some non-cooperative bulletproof countries and bulletproof hosting providers. No light is put on their owners, on their users, and that's the main difficulties we can see here. Creating the stable infrastructure and some forms like procedures of taking down criminal activity in any form. Right now it's working good for phishing, for example. It's 24 hours for any provider. We can take down the resource, anyone can take down. But it's evolving. Now it's scam. Now it's more and more forms with the same amount of money inside. And the law enforcement, the law jurisdictions, the new laws must be implemented to go along with the evolution of the internet.
Thank you, Mr. Rozanov. I think we have time for only one more question. So I'll go to Ms. Ashley Taylor. The question is, what are some of the challenges presented by the internet? How have states reacted to the loss of absolute power in cyberspace? If you would like to answer that.
For sure. So from the UN sanctions context, we can think about it in terms of the types of sanctions measures there are, which I think is an interesting way to think about it, because that's supposed to be the format where we can all agree. So we have arms embargoes. How are those violated with the internet? So recruitment. Social media is a really good tool for recruitment. Using Twitter, Facebook, chat rooms, you're able to access a much wider group of people. than you would without it. And also, and ISIS has been really good at this, learning how to target people based upon their social media profiles. That's the business model of the internet, right? Advertising. But if you can then use that to find people that fit the profile that might be recruited, well, you're getting an additional benefit of the internet. So also with arms embargoes, we have things like websites and dark markets, which provide access to things without following normal restriction protocol. Of course, that's a big issue. Of course, different cyber currencies, not necessarily Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is actually not good for criminals because it's super public, but there are cryptocurrencies that are much more private that can facilitate transactions in terms of things that would violate an arms embargo. There have been some types of regulation in that direction, but notoriously these things are very difficult to regulate. So in terms of arms embargoes, we're there. In terms of asset freezes, of course, the cyber currencies come into play here. Of course, cryptocurrency mining of new assets is a big deal because then proliferator states can access new funds. North Koreans have actually shown that they can hack into other people's computers and turn them into mining machines to create new cryptocurrencies for them. Also, countries that have, cheaper energy, so they have oil, can easily turn that oil into cryptocurrencies to get around asset freezes. So those are definitely some issues that we can think about. In terms of how people are responding to more regulation, I think the big sort of question here is, do we want more self-regulation, or do we want countries to come together to promote regulation that they want to see in the internet? I'm more a fan of the latter. I think that the private sector can do a really good job of developing innovating solutions, generating new business models, but I think they're not the best at understanding how their systems get weaponized. So I think we're really at a point where we need more countries to come together and give more feedback to the space so that it develops in a more responsible direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. I think we have finished the time. And with this, I'd like to thank all the panelists for excellent opening remarks as well as a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. And I hand the floor back to Madam Vaishali Raghuvanshi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I once again thank everyone, especially you, for moderating the session so well, bringing out the technical aspect as well as the normative sphere of what we're discussing as a cyberspace and the discussion about the cyber security environment and all. So first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing the wonderful session and keeping the discussions in line with what we have taken out as a theme for the session, and also bringing out all the important narratives out of the discussions which we had from all the eminent speakers on the idea of deep web, dark web, and the cybersecurity standards and technology. Also, the discussions about fake news, technology bubble, internet governance, requirement of the judicial activism. I would say I'm taking the liberty, being the political science person, I'm taking the liberty to talk and to frame it as the idea of judicial activism, because that is something which we use in the domestic realm so much. And that is something what is required at the international cyber level as well, when we talk about it at the global level, especially. And also about the discussion which we had about the cyber capabilities. And I'm sure everyone who is a participant here would have got something to think about it for the entire day. And then something which we have this idea of speaking generally about the cyberspace, and we don't get into the intricacies of it, of the same, and especially the technical aspect of it. So I'm sure all the participants here, all the listeners would have got something to take from here, especially in the technical terms, and also, like I was saying, at all the three levels, which is individual, state, and international. So I especially thank you for moderating the session and bringing out all the different narratives out of all the discussions which we had in terms of the area of the expertise of all the speakers. And then I would go on to thank each speaker for the day for this session, starting with Madam Vijayalata Reddy. She has spoken so well on all the intergovernmental aspect. And then we have Willis Trainer, the Vice Chairperson of GCTC, International Cybersecurity Conference, and the former Director, National Cybersecurity Authority, Israel. Sir has brought in the points which are of much relevance when we talk about the country-specific aspect. And then the Professor Sadi Kreese. Madam has very well given us the technical realm of what any layman can understand out of the cybersecurity realm. And then Enrico Caris, he's a managing director, CCSI US, as you have introduced. And all the other speakers, Ilya Rosnov and Dr. Paul Vixen, Ken Noor, all of them have spoken about the technical aspect, especially the demonstration of how Ilya has demonstrated the very technical aspect of it, and then it has gone to the all the audience. And especially when we talk about the UN related intervention in the cyberspace, that is something which gets the ear and the eyes of each and every person, because that is the one organization we call synonymous to the IO, especially when we talk about the intergovernmental agencies which must intervene in the affair of the cybersecurity at the global level. We always fall back on the UN, and we have this idea, we have this understanding that when it comes to the cyber aggression, when it comes to the information technology which is affecting to the people at large, and when we call this as the common pool challenge which the entire international system is facing, we know that the discussion about United Nations intervention in that area specifically is required and desired. So with all of this, I would once again thank everyone. I had two things in my mind with which I don't think we have time to discuss about that, but still I would like everyone to think about it, and then probably if we meet at some point in time at somewhere, we'll talk about the entire idea of how far. I'll go with the understanding of the Clausewitz, and Clausewitz is a famous military theorist, and he has deliberated over the war as a means to carry out the politics. And what I see today and what I witness today is that the war, a specific term which we used in a traditional sense as a face-to-face strategy, or the strategy which was very much traditional per se, today we see it as something which is not visible, and but still it is happening. And that goes, I mean, that brings my understanding to the involvement of the non-state actors in war. And there comes the dilemma, to use the word cyber warfare and cyber terrorism. So that dilemma still exists. Are we going to talk much about the cyber terrorism when we talk about the cyber space and the security dilemma and the security paradox which we have, or it is going to be specifically about the cyber warfare in terms of the intergovernmental participation in that? Thank you so much. With this, I would once again thank you everyone on behalf of the organizing team, all the eminent universities participating in the organization of this, and hoping to see you again at some platform, at some other space. Thank you so much. This is me, Dr. Raghuvanshi, signing off.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.